Are we live or is it
You are.
Oh, live?
Just my mic.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm Jamie Coleman. I'm the coordinator for the East Aurora Family Support Center. We're really grateful today to have Carl Shellhorn from the Western New York Mental Health Advocates, or Mental Health Advocates of Western New York, Director of Youth Services, and providing a presentation tonight about what they do. We want to introduce them to the community, hopefully establish more of a partnership with Carl and his services in Western New York, and also talk a little bit about some things that are helpful for parents to know about mental health and their kids and what to do. Carl, thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. So thanks for those of you who are in person. Thanks for you who are watching online or might be accessing this later, because I understand it'll be on demand on the website, which is great. I think that's a great tool because we live in an on-demand world. So my name is Carl Shellhorn. I'm the Director of Youth Programs at Mental Health Advocates of Western New York. I've been working in addiction mental health now about 22 years. I started my career as an addiction counselor a long time ago, 30 years ago, at Buffalo General. I was a counselor there, and then I went to higher ed for 12 years, and then I came back to behavioral health because I wanted to work. So I serve on the board of directors. I'm the vice chair for the board of directors of the Mental Health Association of New York State. So that's something I do. I also write for BP Magazine, and I have a radio show called Mental Health Versus, which is on the Buffalo State radio station. Comes on every Monday at 6 o'clock. Goes into mental health, music, which are my two favorite topics. But we're here to talk tonight about things that parents need to know and can benefit from understanding mental health, and maybe even to deconstruct it or demystify it. Because I think one of the things that happens is, and I found in a lot of conversations I've had with people in general, is that there's just a lot of misunderstanding about what mental health is and what it isn't. As far as knowing what the signs, symptoms are to look for, how to, say, interact if their child may be experiencing a problem. So how to identify those. So we're going to kind of go into that. Real quick, back to the radio show, I had on one of my team members. So I supervise a team of youth advocates. I'm going to talk more about them. But I had her and her mom on last night. It was a 90-minute expanded version of the phone. But it was great because I had Ava, she's 18, her mom. And so they talked about the challenges that Ava has and so forth, and how they go through it, and things that parents would need to know. So it's really good for parents to understand how to communicate. And that's one of the things I'm going to get into too. So as you see here, we have a number of programs at MHA, which I'll kind of go over briefly. We have basic emotional skills training, which is a program that goes into schools pre-K through 2. It's really more social and emotional learning in nature, but really it's just designed to help little ones understand better how to engage with each other, develop maybe healthier behaviors, and interact with each other. CASA is Court-Appointed Special Advocates. That program is geared towards youth in the family court system. That might be either going through some form of dealing with neglect or abuse. And our CASA volunteers work one-on-one with youth, a young person, and provide maybe some supports they might not be getting otherwise. And the CASA volunteers are phenomenal. They do great work. That they follow a youth that actually I think it's up to, I can't remember if it's 18 or 21, but anyway, they follow someone for a period of time where it's not just one and done. So that's pretty cool. Legal services, we offer free legal service for individuals that live with a mental health challenge. So it's basically anything that is in the area, I just say civil, whether it be housing, SSI, even divorce, matrimony, just nothing absolutely criminal or related, but they're all free services. And so that's another great resource. We have OPCOM, which is Operation Children of the Military. That program works with families and children that are military in nature. And we have parents and children go through the program. They have regular events, they outings and so forth. They go to the zoo, they've got a Beaver Hollow. So they do a lot of great things that help children who may not have friends who can identify with having a parent in serving, whether it be deployed or even not deployed. Information referral is the place where if you call our agency, you get a hold of one of our staff, and you can ask them what resources are in the community or our website. So they just really navigate the system, which can be extremely complicated even for those of us who work in the system, it's not complicated. So our INR people help kind of cut through a lot of that and help our community members. Mindset is our workplace wellness program. We deliver programs to businesses and workplaces on understanding mental health and making companies better off in terms of just employees and being healthier in terms of their mind, body, and spirit. And lastly, just one is our peer-to-peer program. It's focusing on youth under the age of 21, 12 to 21. And really what it is it's a website, justtell1.org, but also it offers resources and videos on helping youth understand how to reach out to a trusted adult when they might be struggling, or even on the website, how to be a trusted adult and talk to someone who might approach you. So we're also incorporating, I'll say very soon, a text chat line, a warm line for youth that's going to be geared towards like an after school, 3 to 8 p.m. roughly kind of thing. That's going to tie into the Just Tell One platform. And so youth can simply text and connect with someone, because that's how communication is done. So a lot of great things we do with MHA. So, but I want to talk really specifically about the Child Family Support Program, which is another program we have, which is more germane to a lot of what we're talking here tonight. So you see here, information referrals, one thing. They offer the Child Family Support Program offers information for parents and caregivers on that one-on-one family support. All of our, they call them family care advocates, FPAs, are people with lived experience having had a child in the child serving system with the mental health change. So they've all been there and had that experience, which they can relate to other parents, which of course is invaluable because sometimes people don't understand, like I said. So having that relationship, saying, I've been there, this might help, is really valuable. We also work in the wraparound program through the county, High Fidelity Wraparound, and we have family care advocates as well as 2 youth care advocates who serve and help the wraparound program, the wraparound system for individual youth that need, say, more services and might be more at risk. So it's this system of care, this network, and this safety net for youth that might be in need. We also have services that are involved as far as family and caregiver support programs. So they have respite sometimes and other programs for families. We have a teen support group and a 20-something support group that meet at Richmond, at Pilgrim St. Luke's Church on Richmond and Utica, but it's also available via Zoom. So we have flyers and information on, in fact, we sent something out just recently about the programs we have, where even if someone, say from East Aurora, can't make it to the city, you can still do it by Zoom. You can still access it and be online because it's a hybrid program. It meets 6 o'clock on Fridays, so it's a great program. So we have respite, social skill groups for youth. So those are operating more through our school-based programs, family activities, Saturday programs. Nurtured Heart is another series we do for families to help with their children. And of course, educational workshops, kind of like we're doing as well for schools and families and others. So let's talk about this. So we have a graphic here, the mind-body connection. Now, one thing we understand is that certainly our bodies will oftentimes react, say, to stress, for instance. And we all are under stress. I don't care who you are, stress and others. So a lot of times it's how do you deal with that stress, but also how stress manifests itself. And of course, when you think about stress in our lives and how it manifests, sometimes it may come out mentally or even emotionally. I mean, there's mental health effects of stress, there's physical health effects of stress, there's emotional and behavioral effects. So there's all these different effects that take place with stress. But as you see here, we have headaches and certainly sensory overload and tense shoulders, cramps. So these are kind of things that oftentimes we have when people are dealing with their mental health and it's affecting them physically, but they don't make that connection. They oftentimes think it's a physical issue first. So what do? They go to their doctor and say, my doctor is Dr. Richard Charles. So, Dr. Charles, I've got these headaches, I don't know where they're coming from. Well, they might ask some questions and maybe run some blood work, and it turns out, well, it's not that. It might be stress related, or better yet, say I'm having heart palpitations. That's an even better example, and I don't know where they're coming from, and I'm worried about it. And once again, I go to my doctor, and he does an assessment and so forth, and checks my blood work and EKG and all that, it's all normal. Turns out it's anxiety. Like, it might be an anxiety attack. I've had it actually happen in my life. And so what we know is that if a person's dealing with these physical complications related to stress or anything else related to their mental and emotional health, those are like the warning signs we talk about to be aware of. And so we give this graphic just to show how much the mind and body are really intricately connected with each other and how they feed off each other. Our brain is part of our body. People oftentimes remember that. Our mind is sort of like part of the brain and how it operates, but they're all connected. And then we have certainly the different trauma responses. Now, trauma is something that a lot of research has come out about trauma over the years. It really started many, many years ago, early in the era of soldiers coming from overseas, or not even overseas, but being involved in battle and being involved with, say, they call it shell shock or things like that, that would produce responses to horrific events or things that might be life-altering or even life-threatening. So one of the things I know I've done several trauma trainings, and they always talk about how, imagine you're being chased by a tiger, and then you have this reaction. Well, you fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And certainly the fawn might be different, but certainly the fight, flight, or freeze is sometimes how people respond to trauma. And certainly with this fight and flight, you talk about the sympathetic nervous system, which is how we respond as far as the mental, emotional part of it, anxiety and fear, that flight thing, that perfectionism. I was talking before we even started how my daughter has had to cope with anxiety and school and so forth, and she's a perfectionist though. And so when someone's a perfectionist, they will certainly sometimes put more pressure on themselves, put the anxiety of getting things done. And then, of course, the more you do that, then you might procrastinate, which creates more anxiety. It's like a cycle that feeds on itself. So, but in terms of trauma itself, that's one of the reactions that can happen when someone's dealing with trauma. They might want to just run, or they might want to avoid it, which is another aspect of trauma response. The fight part is where there's that irritability, anger, depression, or aggression. And then freeze is where it's really related more towards being stuck and you see immobilized. So one thing that I've also seen for people with stress or trauma is that, like I said, this idea of avoidance. I'll give an example. So say a person has been in a car accident and they are in a car accident with someone else. You've got two people, same situation. The one person walks away, and I'm not saying a major car accident, it might be maybe a fender bender, but regardless, one person walks away, no problem, they can get back in the car the next day. The other person might say, be so traumatized, we'll say, that they may not want to get back in the car and might have trouble riding in the car, or even being at that intersection, that place where that accident might happen. So it's all the response to trauma, and trauma happens in all kinds of different ways. It's not just to car accidents. It could be grief, it could be loss in terms of losing a loved one. It could be resulting from abuse. It could be resulting from a natural weather event. Yesterday morning we had an earthquake in West Europe. That was a surprise when I was in my bathroom at 6:08 or whatever it was in the morning was. I felt the earth shake. That was a little concerning. I think it traumatized a few people. But the bottom line, and I'm not trying to make light of it, but those are kind of things that will kind of put someone into a trauma response. We had a blizzard that was horrific, and whether it be hurricanes or natural weather events, those can also be the things that can trigger trauma responses. A fire. Someone experiences a fire in their home. Another thing that could create trauma. So in other words, there's all kinds of things that are trauma related, but we know that what happens, so like I said before about the persons in the car accident, what one person experiences is traumatic, another person may not. We all respond to trauma differently. And so that's the key, is that understanding how to sort of address the trauma for a person in a way that, as we say, doesn't re-traumatize them in the therapeutic process and helps them move beyond what they're going through to how to come to terms with it. The spawning idea is more recent in terms of understanding trauma responses, but it is like you see here a lot of people pleasing, avoiding conflict, having difficulty saying no. And that's something that I have trouble with sometimes. But regardless, it's the kind of thing where it's a trauma response. So we know there's all kinds of things that relate to trauma that affect people in their lives that they may not even recognize that they're being traumatized or dealing with trauma. So like I said, stress. Now, we're all under stress, and of course, stress happens in our lives. It would be work-related, but even with young people. It could be school assignments, it could be getting ready for a sporting event, it could be performing in the orchestra, or choir, or in a play, or speaking in front of people. All these things can produce stress. So as a result, being cranky or unable to manage small problems, getting frustrated, loss of temper, inability to focus, worry about small things, worry that bad things are about to happen. So this worry that bad things are about to happen is certainly anxiety itself. So if you think of someone who they use this term worry wart, they're always worrying about something, that could be seen as maybe generalized anxiety disorder. That's actually more of a clinical term, but there's people who just have this tendency to worry about things that aren't specifically tied to anything. It's this general sense that they're experiencing worry. But a lot of it is exacerbated, I should say, or even triggered by stress. So stress is the main thing to understand how to manage and how to deal with in our lives. And that's a big challenge for a lot of us because our lives are so stressful these days. And especially, we're still kind of in COVID or post-COVID or dealing with COVID, and then the after effects of that also relate to stress. As far as mental health conditions are concerned, or disorders, or challenges, or diagnoses, anxiety is the number one mental health diagnosis in terms of the number of people in the United States that have a mental health diagnosis. And when I say anxiety, there are a number of different types of anxiety disorders, but if you put them all together, anxiety is number one. So, in other words, 1 out of 5 people in our country lives with a diagnosed mental health condition. And out of that 1 in 5, approximately 1 in 5, 19 or 20% or so, have an anxiety disorder. So, if you figure we have, 300 million people in this country, and then 1 out of 5 is 60 million, and you break it down. So, 12 million people, if I did the math correctly, have some type of anxiety disorder. That's a lot of people. And the thing is that you see here early warning signs. And this is, of course, for young people and students. These are the things that you look out for if your child might be experiencing anxiety, not doing schoolwork. As I said, I have to use my daughter's example again, but just putting things off, procrastinating for whatever reason. Errors and accidents in their work. Not going to school. We know that's a big one for some students. They physically experience anxiety to the point where they can't get to school, whether it be stomach problems or other issues, or just the worry or things that are just so troublesome to them that there's a sense that they can't do it, or have trouble with even connecting with others in terms of the relationships at school. Not wanting to engage in activities. Now, you might have a child that, say, for instance, might be very active in sports or another activity, then all of a sudden they decide to drop out, and you don't know why. And so you might explore a little bit, and it might be anxiety related. They might, as I said before, they might not want to try going to that gymnastics event or that football game and doing whatever is necessary to perform. Unhealthy relationships is certainly something that can create anxiety. We know that school-age children sometimes are involved in unhealthy relationships, whether it be the people-pleasing type or the type where they are involved in, I would almost say, I hate to use the word toxic, but sometimes there are influences that we know that happen in schools that might produce relationships that might not be healthy for that child, that might need to be addressed. Expressions of grandiose or strange ideas. That one is actually can be also tied into, say, psychosis, which also is maybe somewhat anxiety related, but also just a warning sign of a mental health issue in itself. And then marked behavioral personality changes. Of course, if you see something that's different, then absolutely that's something to take consideration of with the child, that if they're not behaving like they typically would, then yeah, you want to be aware of that. You want to do something about that because there's something needs to be addressed. And then we have the unhealthy coping, we call them mechanisms as opposed to skills, coping skills. So things like substance use, that's one of the ones that is, I'd say for many youth is a go-to because it's about self-medicating. A little backstory for myself, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I've been clean for 35 years through a 12-step program. And I know my use started when I was 15 years old. I went to a party, and mind you, I'm dating myself, but I went to a party, a lot of beer, and it was flowing, and I got intoxicated. And I woke up with a hangover the next day, and I said, never again. Well, next party, it happened. And so over time, it just kind of got more into this thing of drinking alcohol, and it became excessive. And they talk about binge drinking, which is a problem for some people. It became binge drinking. But then when I went to college, that's when everything really happened. And of course, some of those who might be viewing right now or might be watching this later may be having a child, the children going into college. One thing we have to remember is that when young people are preparing to transition to college, they need to be ready for the challenges there. So even though we're talking about to a sort of a high school, middle school, even elementary school audience right now, it's that getting ready for college is a whole other consideration, understanding some of the things to be aware of. So there are things as well. But certainly in the idea of the high school, middle school, where these things tend to emerge, there's definitely things to be aware of with substance use. Overeating is another way of self-medicating. The whole idea is to feel better or alleviate the symptoms you're experiencing. And when you overeat or if you use a substance, you're kind of engaging that part of the brain that releases dopamine and that kind of feel-good chemical that says, I like this, I want to do it more. And the more you do it, it diminishes the dopamine, you need more to get to the right level and so forth. But what I'm saying is that it's problematic when it becomes habitual and then the person is kind of caught up and they're stuck in the cycle and thereby they're having trouble getting away from it. So that's another thing too, where if a parent observes something that might be unusual and might need to be addressed, like substance use, the best idea is to intervene early. And I can't stress that enough when it comes to any type of concern with a young person, whatever the age. The earlier intervention, typically the better the outcome. So we know that if a person, say, maybe 14, 15 years old, these issues are coming about, yes, you should get the help, and then hopefully it'll take care of the problem a little better than letting it just persist. Shopping, certainly excessive social media, which is one that is, I'd say, maybe even the last 7 or 8 years, it's going to become more pronounced with young people. And, what do you call it, digital toxicity or whatever. There's just a lot of social media out there that might not be healthy for whatever the reason. And so that's the thing. Blaming others is something that some people will do to sort of deflect or not take responsibility for their actions. And then denial is simply just saying, I don't have a problem. And being able to say that it's not an issue. And of course, everyone else may see it, but they may not see it. And then hostility is one that can be related to other conditions and behavioral disorders. But the idea, though, is that these things can all result from having anxiety and so forth, ways to try to cope in unhealthy ways. Now, as far as things that can be done that are healthy coping skills for would be anxiety or basically any other mental challenge or in general, we talk about self-care these days. Now, in my world of behavioral health and so forth, wellness is almost a cliche term, right? Eat your fruits and vegetables, get your sleep, sit on a mat and say om. But in reality, a lot of that is true. So first of all, sleep. Sleep is underrated, and I think a lot of young people struggle with sleep because of things like social media and sleep cycles and understanding circadian rhythms and so forth that might affect teenagers differently than other folks. So, but sleep is important. And if a young person isn't getting enough sleep, then they're going to have trouble in school because they can't focus, or they just might struggle staying awake even. And so sleep is important, and trying to regulate sleep And so that's something that I find, even myself, I live my phone disorder. That's the thing that happened to me when I went to college at 18. I had this episode and had to work through it over several years. But for me, sleep is essential. I have to have sleep. If I don't, then that's an issue. So most people who have some type of mental related condition, sleep is vital. Healthy foods. Now, the food we eat is important because you have to nourish the body so that you're able to function. And we need healthy foods to be able to even concentrate or focus. That's why schools have breakfast programs across all districts. I mean, if a child goes to school hungry, then they're not going to be able to focus because they're hungry. They can't focus on their work. So food is very important. Exercise, as I'm sure many people have heard over time, is really critical in terms of just keeping yourself not only function physically, but mentally and emotionally. When a person exercises regularly, they are more likely to feel better mentally and emotionally because, like I said before, that's another way of engaging the dopamine and serotonin and the hormones in our brains that work. I work out. I cycle. I used to run. But for me now, cycling is my thing, and I just did it today. We have a gym where I work, which is phenomenal. So I was on the recumbent bike, and I busted out some time, and I did the treadmill and walked on the treadmill. But just the regular exercise is vital because not only am I helping myself physically, but mentally, emotionally, it's helped me. And I haven't experienced any profound depression episodes in a long time. So that's crucial, but especially for young people. So even if a young person may not be an athlete, they can still exercise and find something that's fun. And the key is finding something that's fun because not everybody wants to run a marathon. They might like swimming or yoga or riding a bike, but just to do something. Meditation certainly is something that's really critical, I think, for a lot of people these days to learn. There are a lot of tools, all kinds of tools for meditation. I meditate pretty much every day. I use an app called Insight Timer. There's all kinds of meditation apps out there, but meditation is really good because you saw before the sympathetic nervous system. When you meditate, you engage what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, which regulates our breathing, blood pressure, those things that we really don't pay attention to but are vital. And so when we meditate, we're able to regulate our breathing. And also, when you talk about the idea of mindfulness meditation, which is a big thing these days, it helps you kind of stay in the moment, so to speak, and you're not thinking about yesterday, you're not focusing on tomorrow, you're staying in that moment. But there's lots of tools, basically, that can be taught meditation. And when a young person, especially, learns these tools, they're going to be healthier. So there are a lot of ways to integrate meditation very easily. Like I said, the app that I use, there's a timer. You can set for 1 minute. They have guided meditations, all kinds of things to learn that are very simple. And they're fun. Do things you love, like I said. The great thing about wellness is engaging in activity that you enjoy. Example, I don't knit, but I know people do. One of my youth career advocates on my team, youth career advocates are young people who have lived experience with the Mental Health Challenge. They do presentation in schools, they do work with young people. But my one YPA, Jill, likes to knit and do crochet, things like that. And she'll do it in her meetings because it's a way of staying busy with her hands. But it's something she loves to do. Crafting and so forth. That's healthy because that can be almost a form of a meditative exercise. Do something you love, and that's critical to being healthy. Also, spirituality is something that sometimes people think it means going to church. Well, spirituality is multifaceted. It could be enjoying the outdoors. We have 4 seasons here in West Europe, which is a great thing. And of course, here in East Aurora, it's right in our own backyard. And so whether it be going to the park or taking a walk in the winter, or going to the beach in the summer. There's all kinds of ways to experience spirituality through nature. Or it could be connecting with a faith-based community. Or it could be even finding ways to meditate, which is another way to practice spirituality. I think for many people it's individualized, but it's just another tool for wellness. Now, technology, like I said before, is something that many young people struggle with. It really is a double-edged sword, I think, if you ask me. I've talked to many young people about social media use, and in conversations I've had with them, they too acknowledge the same thing. There's good things that come with it, a lot of things you can learn, but also there's other things that may not be as good. So certainly the negative effects are that I talk about that quality of sleep, the decline of sleep. In other words, being on a device all times of night. And then certainly social life can be damaging because we know that cyberbullying and things like that occur, or comparing themselves to others is a big thing now with social media. The FOMO, fear of missing out kind of idea of looking at someone's life and saying, oh, that's great, and I'm not doing that, I wish I was. Even adults get into that kind of mode sometimes, older folks. So that's another thing too. Damage to social and family bonds. Social media has really done something where it's just got kind of nasty sometimes in these interactions that people have on social media. So it has kind of created a divide that separates people. And unfortunately, that's one of the casualties, I think, of this whole social media movement that needs to be monitored, but especially for young people, because at their ages, they may not be fully able to developmentally understand some of the things that they see, and that's the catch. I mean, as adults, we get it. We can discern maybe what is, I'll just say, healthy versus unhealthy. They may not be able to so much, whether it be because of their experience or just how old they are, or even, like I said, developmentally, how old they are. It leads to a sedentary lifestyle and obesity. If a young person's on their phone all day, and they're not exercising or whatever, that's going to lead to just health problems. So that's something to be concerned about. Chronic smartphone stress. So that idea of stress, but this is a new kind of stress. So the idea of, you ever wait for a text and not get it? You text somebody, where's the text? Did you get back to me? And so that's actually a form that can produce stress. Or you ever see what they call the little lips, and then it stops, and then you're waiting? So even with phones can create stress. And that's another thing to consider just in terms of technology. And then lastly, it can cause depression because, as I said before, there's this way of looking at other people's lives and comparing yourself to others, which is really dangerous because that's a way of saying that my life isn't as good as theirs. They're maybe even better off, and I'm not. So a lot of things with social media out there right now that might be detrimental. There are other good things about it, but I think for parents especially, it's understanding how to monitor. There's a lot of great ways to monitor social media these days that weren't even around years ago. Ways to monitor phone usage and so forth, apps that are helpful. But you got to remember, they're smart. So it's like you have to always be a step ahead. But the bottom line is, it's important to try to do whatever you can to keep an eye on this. So good relationships keep us happier and healthier. So basically, it's not just the number of friends you have, it's the quality of your close relationships. And good relationships don't just protect our bodies, they protect our brains. And in my book, relationships are the most important thing in life. Point blank. And of course, because the quality of relationships are a reflection of ourselves. And if you have healthy relationships, then that's sort of like how your life plays out. And I think for young people especially, that's where they learn to develop healthy relationships in school, certainly, and with their families, with their other friends. So it's teaching our children how to have a healthy relationship with someone. And that's challenging, as I said, in this day and age, when there are just so many distractions or things that are out there that might make it difficult. But emphasizing to our children that what it means to have a healthy relationship, how it means to set boundaries, what it means to say, as you say, no means no. And when you're able to do that, you're able to be more self-assured, have better self-esteem, and understand that, yes, I can get through things maybe better if I have a good relationship with people than if I don't. I don't have to go it alone. And that's another thing too. Sometimes children and students and youth feel alone because they don't have these relationships that it just makes things hard to get through life. And I know that there's some students in school who are alone and may feel that they don't have connections that they could benefit from. They may want them, but they may struggle. So sometimes we need to teach them how to develop these things. And there's ways to do that. There's supports in schools, and there's things like that, and other ways to do that. But I think relationships are the kind of thing that will carry us from childhood into adulthood. So if you don't have healthy relationships when you're young, it might carry on in adulthood, which could cause problems. So it's important to start when you're. So the key is it's okay to ask for help. So the idea is, would you walk on a broken leg for 10 years? No. You get help for it. You get a cast, you ask for crutches. Well, the same thing, with the mental health. Find a trusted person. So we talked about the Just Tell One program, like I mentioned before. It's emphasizing to our child or our student, or even the one we take care of, find a trusted adult who you can share your feelings with. It may not be me. We know that sometimes kids don't want to talk to their parents. Even I did this radio show last night that I do, and I had my one youth advocate, Ava, on with her mom. And during the interview, she said, well, there's some things I don't want to talk to my mom about, which is normal. I mean, there are things like that. But who's another trusted adult? It might be someone at school. It could be a coach. It could be a faith leader, whatever. But the bottom line is find that trusted adult. If someone is threatening harm to themselves or another person, get help immediately. Now, there's this idea that protecting the person's confidentiality in terms of these relationships, especially with trusted adults, and that is a privacy thing that is taken very seriously. And I think what it comes down to, though, is, as you see here, if that young person is threatening harm to themselves or another person, that is when we notify the authorities, or by calling 911, calling crisis service. Or better yet, there is a Spectrum CARES line, which is a number that's available through, if you just Google Spectrum CARES, CARES, I think it's 824-357. I could be wrong, but anyway, it's like crisis services for kids. And so it's run by Spectrum Human Services, but so there's even a crisis number for them. And we at the MHA are developing a text chat line for young people that'll be up in development within the year that they can text with one of our YPAs and get help. So that's going to be something I think that might be very helpful for young people. And then virtually every mental health issue is treatable and can be made better with treatment. So the idea, though, is that even though a young person may be experiencing whatever the concern or challenge is, it may seem like it's hopeless, but I can say, even from my own experience with the young people that I have on my team of youth care advocates, other young people, it isn't a life sentence always. It's the kind of thing that if you treat it early, it can be treated, and then a better outcome can happen. And I think it's sometimes difficult for parents to see because you're so wrapped up in your child. And sometimes it's even hard to believe that your child is going through this. But the reality is, if you face it and you confront it and you're sensitive to your child's needs and help them, then they can work through it many times and get the help they need. It isn't always an easy road. I'm not trying to say it is, but it is possible. And as your situation evolves, or if you're not getting the care you need, don't hesitate to make changes. This is the case where, and this is what I was going to point out last night in the interview that I did with Ava and her mom, Tracy. We talked about Ava's experience with getting counseling, and she started when she was 14. She said the first counselor she went to, she didn't like it. Because, and I won't go into all the reasons, but it's basically, it wasn't a good fit, as we say. And for myself, having been in counseling and therapy now for about 40 years or so, I know what it means to meet with a therapist and know it's working or not. You can tell the very first time you meet with them if you like that person. So if it isn't working, if your child isn't clicking, find somebody else. It's okay to get a second opinion on it. Same kind of thing. You do that for medical problems. You can do the same thing for someone who you're trying to get help with a mental or emotional challenge. So if your child is indicating that, I don't like this person, I'm resistant, then say, well, you know what, maybe if we go to someone else, it might work. It might take some coaxing. Even Ava said at 14, she resisted the idea of accepting that she was facing something. And that's not uncommon. So that's really where patience comes in, and understanding, and take the time to speak with your child honestly, but also maybe not in a non-judgmental manner, I should say. And that way, kind of keep those lines of communication open. But the bottom line is that if it isn't working with someone, it's okay to go somewhere else. And even within agencies, I know sometimes people go to I'll just say call them community-based providers, whether it be Horizon or Best Self or Endeavor, Spectrum, so forth. All those agencies, they have multiple counselors. So if it isn't working with one person, it's okay to ask for somebody else. So how do we help our children? First of all, accept your own feelings about the situation. Like I said, this is hard for sometimes parents to cope with. The little story is my own mother was a rehabilitation counselor. She went to school and graduated, I think, in 1977 from the University of Buffalo. But when I had my mental health episode crisis, her counseling degree went out the window and she was a mom. She struggled, I think, many years with this whole idea that I was having problems with addiction and my mental health. So it's about accepting how you feel about the situation. And also, I think unfortunately, sometimes parents blame themselves for these things. And it isn't, I'm not gonna say specifically, but many times it isn't necessarily the fault of a parent because these things happen. Sometimes things happen for whatever reason. We call them risk factors. There are a lot of risk factors that contribute to a person developing a mental health challenge. And so it could be a number of things. So, but the bottom line is to understand your own feelings and then know your own support system. Who do you have as a parent or a caregiver to work with? Who are your friends? Who you can trust? And that's another thing too. There's such thing as stigma. Stigma is an issue because people don't want to talk about this sometimes. And I said, you might not want to talk to a friend and tell them that your child's struggling, but there might be someone else who you can tell. Having the support is really important because if you open up and tell someone, they might open up and tell you. And that's a lot of times how these things happen. And then also modeling appropriate coping skills. This is really crucial. Like I said, substance use, for instance. I'll just say that if a parent's coming home and drinking a six-pack, for example, and end up, crashing on the couch every night, that's not a good coping skill to teach your child, as opposed to maybe learning things like, let's say, exercise or the things I talked about before that are more healthy to model. And I have to say, honestly, even my own experience having two adult daughters, 27, 24, having gotten through those challenging adolescent years and even to adulthood, my wife and I did the best we could to model good coping skills. And I think they turned out okay. Even though my younger daughter lives with anxiety, she has learned to cope with it, and my older daughter is doing pretty well. So I think we did our job, but I'm not saying we're model parents, ideal parents, but the idea is that we try to show our kids through our own actions what it means to deal with stress, for instance, how to cope when you're having a problem, how to understand that you don't go off on someone if you're upset, how to communicate that. So there's a lot of things to teach and model. And then certainly ask your child how they're feeling, plain and simple. And also we say ask an open-ended question. A lot of times kids will say, how are you feeling? Or how are you doing? Good. Okay. Well, try to engage in conversation, and not that you're probing, but try to get to the point where they're willing to hopefully open up a little bit more and talk to you. Or also say, remember this too, they may not be ready to talk at that time, but say, well, John, I know you're not ready to talk right now about it. I know you seem upset, but if you want to come to me later, that's okay. We can talk about it then. Keep that line of communication open. Let them know that you're available. And listen to what they're saying and acknowledge your feelings. That's key, listening. And sometimes as parents, and myself included, I'm not the best listener. So what we know is that when you're really listening to your child, you're understanding where they're coming from and not placing judgment and trying to really see what's going on as opposed to maybe placing your perspective or even your idea onto them, or what's the way I'm trying to say it? Kind of put your own beliefs into the, what's happening on them. So the idea is to acknowledge what they're feeling and not to dismiss it. One thing, for example, is that say a child has a breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend, and you might say, oh, it's just a phase, happens to everybody. That's a real thing for them. That's like, it might be the first time. It could be a heartbreaker. So we have to recognize that's something that's real to them, and you want to acknowledge that. You don't want to just play it off. And that's just one of many examples. Then when we respond, be honest and supportive. And that's also going to be challenging, but then again, the honesty part is where we have to kind of be able to talk to them and say, you know, John, it seems like, you know, your grades have been slipping, and I noticed that you haven't been participating in the activities like you used to. Is everything okay? Is there anything you want to talk about? And then they say, well, you know, I'm not feeling so great. Well, gee, maybe we might want to talk to them about that. Have you ever thought that we might want to go see a counselor? And it's okay to do that. It's not a problem if you see a lot of people do it, and also normalize it. Like I said, I mean, so many people deal with these things. A lot of people go to therapists and counselors, but sometimes as a young person, they don't know that because they think they're the only ones dealing with that problem. And we have to help them understand that as well. Use empathetic and validating words. Empathy is huge. Again, another thing we talked about last night in the interview. Ava said, with her mom, Tracy, also being a person in recovery from addiction, understands empathy. And that was the thing that helped her so much, is that her mom was very empathetic and was able to use that empathy to connect and understand where she's coming from and validate through words. And also, let them be scared and upset. I mean, a little fear can be motivating, honestly. And I'm not saying that you have to traumatize your child with things, but if they get upset, it's okay for them to get upset. That's sort of being human. Fear is a normal human reaction to things. Being scared is a human reaction, but being upset is something that might be necessary for them to even come to the realization they might need some help. So I think sometimes as a parent, myself included, when I saw, especially my younger daughter, who may have struggled from time to time, when she got really upset, I got upset and kind of threw me off. And I'm a professional. So I said, it's my own daughter, but the idea though is to sometimes we let these things happen and we respond accordingly so that we can get maybe a better result. And then talk about positive aspects, reframing of the return to school in whatever format. So for instance, sometimes we know, especially because of COVID, some students might have had difficulty transitioning back into school. Now, we know that we've been back in schools for a while, but for some students, it's still an issue. We had this conversation before we began tonight. There's some students receiving in-home instruction for whatever reason, and whether it be temporarily or for a longer period of time. But being able to talk about the positive reasons to be in school, the things that are benefits, the idea of developing good relationships, the idea of being involved in activities, that can benefit a person, not just at that time, but as they get older. So that's important too. Resilience. Now, resilience is something that is, as it's been said, the ability to bounce back, say, from an adverse experience. We all have been through adversity, and most of us are able to have resilience. But we talk about positive coping skills and teaching positive coping skills. That's how you help a young person develop resilience. And I always kind of talk about it like developing our resilience muscles. You can build up a young person's muscles by teaching them these coping skills, by helping them understand that, listen, if you do things like exercise, if you do things like engage in a healthy relationship, whether it be with a friend or a trusted adult, that's a positive thing to do. And so confidence, encouraging health responses, like I said, relationship building, and build a try again attitude. That try again attitude is crucial because I think sometimes, unfortunately, it's just so easy to give up and say, okay, I tried, I did this, didn't work. Well, Rome wasn't built in a day, and sometimes we know that sometimes you have to fail. It's okay to fail, but it isn't really failing, it's a lesson. That's how I look at it. So if you've learned something from it, then you can grow. And that's what we're trying to help our children do, is to grow. And when they try again, it's not only resilience, but it helps develop perseverance. And that's the thing in life that's essential, because that's how you work through problems, is learn how to persevere. So by teaching the coping skills, by helping to understand the importance of resilience, instilling confidence, which can be a challenge for some young people, those are all ways to help them get through these tough times. And then routines and schedules. That is also critical as far as the normalcy. In other words, I think young people need routines because it's just a matter of almost like setting boundaries in a way for behaviors. For instance, whether it be meal times. Now, not saying we're old-fashioned, but my wife and I and our daughters would always have dinner together. No TV, at the dining table, until, of course, later in high school, activities and so forth, but for many years. And that was one way, that was a routine. But not only routine, it was a way to bond and have conversations and so forth, but also sleep, like I said before, other routines and schedules. So the idea of scheduling provides for consistency. And that idea of consistency lends itself to being more healthy. And that's another thing that a person can take into adulthood that I think is really something that would be a huge benefit as they transition into those years. Like I said, even going into college and so forth. If a young person has these routines that they're used to, going to college, healthy routines, so forth, they're going to be healthier adults. Now, words are powerful. Ask how things are going. Like I said, open-ended questions. Tell me what you're feeling, not what's wrong with you. Suggest they get help if needed. And then also offer to help them find supports and reinforce that their willingness to talk about school. So all those things are important to do to encourage your child to communicate. And the more you communicate, the more you understand what their needs are and what they might be struggling with. So, as I said, you see here, like, what are you feeling? What's going on right now? What can I help you with? And by encouraging that conversation, they're more likely with time to open up and talk. I mean, it can take time because sometimes these relationships might be, I don't want to say challenging, but it takes practice in a way. It takes repetition and also understanding when to kind of put on a little more, and then when to lean back. So it's kind of like knowing your child. No one knows your child probably better than you. And then, of course, get help needed. And that's, like I said, too, could be a very difficult conversation, especially for teenagers when they are in a stage where they don't want to be known as going to counseling, because that's what crazy people do. Normalizing, like I said, and reinforcing that. Don't say, I know how you're feeling, because that's saying you know what's in their head, and no one knows what's in your child's head. It's like saying, I understand how you're feeling. You can't understand how a person's feeling. You don't know what they're going through. I mean, I can't say that about someone else. And then also snap out of it. That's also one of those antiquated terms that just doesn't work. I think when someone says snap out of it, it's very dismissive. And it's like saying that, oh, your problem, whatever you're going through isn't a problem. It's just get over it. And when I think you hear that message, it can be very discouraging, because what it's saying is that you're not acknowledging how I'm feeling and I need some help. Don't stay away from them. In other words, if your child's isolating or if they're distancing themselves, don't promote it. Try to find ways to connect. And that can be challenging as well these days, because there are ways that, whether it be going to the room alone or other ways, but finding ways to connect, whatever it might be. What's interesting? One of the best ways, and I think some parents out there might know this already, but car rides are the best, because you're in a captive environment and they can't get away. They're not going to jump out of the car. But some of the best conversations I've had were with my kids. True story. I was driving my older daughter, Sarah, to a sleepover, and she had a core group of friends in high school. I mean, these girls were tight, and they're still friends today. And she's 27, so they're about 15. Now, this is right around the time, maybe even 14. It's around the time when I began to tell them a little bit about my substance history. I was well in recovery, so it wasn't like it was a risk. But one of the things I talked to her about, I remember specifically, I said to her, Sarah, there's this thing called genetic predisposition. Do you know what that is? And of course she said no. I said, well, sometimes with addiction, it can be passed along through the genes or DNA and through families. Well, she understood that. Now, did that keep her from experimenting or drinking? No. But I'll put it this way. I know her today, and she knows when to say when. And I think so by teaching how to communicate these things, it's sort of like saying it's okay to talk about it, but find the right way to talk about it and not be afraid to talk about it. So that's important too. And then assume the problem will fix itself. That is never the way to approach it because the problems never do. And of course, if you just think you're just going to brush it under the rug or sweep it to the side, it will get worse. I can almost guarantee it. And that's, I hate to say that because I've seen it happen time and time again when they say that many mental health concerns aren't addressed for up to 10 years. And that's a statistic that's come out, not a statistic, but as that problem persists, it gets worse, like a medical condition. If a person has, say, diabetes and they're diagnosed, it would be type 1 or type 2, and if you don't treat it, it's going to get worse. Same thing with mental health. So you have to address the problem. So know the mental support within school. There are supports here in East Aurora. You've got the Family Support Center, you've got school social workers and counselors. So know where your supports are. Acknowledge academics, emotional and social regression. Of course, we saw this because of COVID, and this is certainly more COVID related, but certainly during even now, we're experiencing this idea that some students have suffered because of COVID and have kind of gone backwards, but these things can be addressed and can be taken care of with the proper approach. Understand the defiance resistance as a method of establishing control. Certainly that's the way that we talk about young people developing autonomy. It's developmental in nature. So this idea of being defined resistant is almost like kind of goes to territory, but then again, they're trying to establish themselves as being who they are and being their own persons. I think though sometimes there comes a point of drawing the line in terms of allowing them to let this happen and then taking over. So it's kind of like where you have to know where to pick your battles. Examine your attitude. I think sometimes with parents, we have to look at ourselves and see how we see the situation. If we're feeling judgmental, we're feeling that our child is developing a problem that either they're not willing to deal with or is something that can't be addressed, then maybe we need to check ourselves and kind of take a look at where we're coming from. Model, like I talked about before, positive attitude. And even the mindset is important to model in terms of just being a positive person. And I know that's hard too. You're not saying to be Pollyanna and look at life through rose-colored glasses, but try to be positive as much as possible. That wears off on people, and especially children. Actively listen to your students' concerns. When I say students, your child. So active listening is being able to listen, but also kind of give back what you heard. So John, what I heard you say is that school's tough because you're having trouble sleeping. Tell me more about that. Paraphrasing, giving that back. Active listening. So be kind and patient with yourself and your children. That is the biggest message I want to give, is that we are all learning. I'm a parent. I'll always be a parent. They'll always be my kids. And we're fortunate to have children that we can raise in a way that perhaps we can try to help them if they're struggling. But it's a privilege, like I said. And it's a hard one, but it's one that can be so worthwhile if you see a positive outcome from the work that you've invested. And it takes a lot of time and energy to invest in your children. But when you see even just the smallest change, whether it be behavior, attitude, grades, you might realize, well, maybe something's working. And then you keep doing those things and you keep building on it. And then also, be patient with your children. It takes time to change behaviors, take time for them to even understand what they're dealing with. But with time, they will understand. So, like I said, Just Told One, I'll tell briefly again, is the program we have. JustToldOne.org is the website for young people and parents. They can go to, and caregivers, about finding a trusted adult to talk to. And there's great videos and so forth on that website. We'll be developing the text chat line out of that. So it's a really excellent resource to check out. We have other community resources, like I said, the Spectrum Cares team. I was right with the number, 882-4357. Oh, that's pretty good. So that is the number for children and teenagers in crisis. Crisis services is for 18 and over, but then again, that's another resource. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is now 988. So if you can't remember anything else, 988. That number does go through to crisis services local. Family Health Center, that's a local organization that can help. Kids Helpline is a number that children call more like a warm line, as we call it. And then there's also a text line for counseling. So these are all things that young people could do to access when they need help. We have a free online screening tool on our website, and that is for mental health for many challenges, whether it be addiction, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, psychosis. There's a youth mental health anonymous screening, PTSD. There's a parental screening, eating disorders, and treatment settings. So survey. So the idea though is if you go to our website at mhawny.org, you can take this assessment, this screening tool. It's all anonymous, but you will get something back, or your child will get something back. And it's a screening tool. It doesn't mean it's definitive, but it can be an indicator that, no, maybe I do need to check something out, whether it be for you or your child. And then, unless specified, our screenings are valid. They only apply for adults. So once again, remember that you have to work with a child in this. Mind you, teens can operate, and we are developing something I do want to say too with Mental Health America, our parent organization, for a chat line for substance use. That'll be launched in 2024, and that'll be for a full year of immediate contact chat for substance use. That is going to be a real game changer. So not only will we have a warm line for mental health, we'll also have one for substance use. So that is our logo, Mental Health Advocates of West New York. We're located on Broadway Street, right next to the famous, I should say, Broadway Market. So certainly we can be contacted at 716-886-1242. Our website is mhawny.org. My name, again, is Kyle Shalahorn. I'm the Director of Youth Programs. If anyone watching needs help with, say, one-on-one peer mentoring, this is another service we provide where a child or a student can get help with a youth peer mentor one-on-one for 12 sessions. You can reach out to us for that. We do have our programs which will be working with these sort of schools, going in and delivering presentations and groups. So we're a resource. If you need a counselor for your child or another resource, reach out. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to connect if any of you want to let me know. So be in touch.